All right, guys, so sorry the first presentation for Protists didn't work, but hopefully this one will work for you and you've got video and audio. So Kingdom Protista is kind of like a junk drawer because this is just the kingdom that you put single-celled eukaryotes, or they're typically single-celled, if they're not a plant and they're not an animal and they're not a fungus. So it's really not, it's a polyphyletic group, and it means that there's organisms that are in this, it's not really a kingdom, Protista, that actually belong to several different lineages. If you were to look at the phylogeny of eukaryotes, they would be really spread out. So typically, if it's not an animal, plant, or fungus, and it's unicellular, then that's a protist. They can be autotrophic, so they can be photosynthetic. Some of them consume other organisms, so they're heterotrophs. Some are motile, some don't move, or they're sessile. And typically they live in aquatic environments because they're usually single-celled and they dry out quickly. So this is showing you how polyphyletic this group is. If you look at, this is the phylogeny of eukaryotes, you can see that animals are up here. There's a choanocyte. Choanocytes live in colonies and they make up sponges, which are the simplest animals that exist. So they're still considered a protist, but they also make up animals, so it's kind of a weird little halfway between transitional organism between animals and protists, but that would be animals, and choanocytes are closely related. So it's weird to have a protist that's more closely related to animals than it is other protists, but that is the case. And animals probably did arise from some type of choanocyte. And then you've got fungi, amoebas. Here you've got a branch with plants and algae. So did plants evolve from some type of algae? Most likely, yeah. And plants are more closely related to red algae than they are any other protist. So you can see why the kingdom Protista isn't really a kingdom. Then you've got Foraminifera, Paramecia, Euglenias. Probably the first protists were very similar to Euglenias, which were just little simple single-celled organisms with a flagellum. So they can move using a flagellum. Sometimes they use cytoplasmic extensions called pseudopods. They can use cilia, which are short and hair-like. Some of them depend on hitching a ride on an organism or in an organism. For instance, malaria is spread by mosquitoes. Dysentery is spread through water. And they can also be spread through the wind. And they reproduce through mitosis. They can also exchange genes through conjugation, and we talked about this earlier with bacteria. It's another way that they can evolve without having to do sexual reproduction. But some can switch between haploid and diploid phases. That's called alternation of generations, and it does sometimes involve sexual reproduction. So you can see here their default is to be diploid, which is different than the fungi. The fungi are default to being haploid. So you've got the diploid spores that are released, and then they grow into the sporangium. Sporangium just means it's basically a spore case. You can have sporangia in fungi, you can have them in protists, you can have sporangia in even plants. So sporangium is sort of like a generalized term. But anyways, so it releases spores. It can grow into a new protist, and here we have meiosis taking place, and we've created unique spores. And of course, they're going to fuse to make a diploid zygote, which can then continue the cycle. So, sorry, We're going to go over roles of protists. A lot of them form the base of the food chain in aquatic ecosystems, along with other organisms. So algae is a term that refers to cyanobacteria, plants, and then also protists. You can also call them phytoplankton. If you're just talking about the really tiny ones, those would be phytoplankton. So the terms are kind of frustrating because they don't actually define what you're looking at. If you say algae, it could be a prokaryote, it could be a plant, it could be a protist. And remember that protists are eukaryotes. So they are organisms that have organelles. They have a nucleus. They have all the same things that plants and animals and fungi do. They just happen to be single-celled, usually. So photosynthetic protists include dinoflagellates. So you can see they have 2 flagella, and they form red tides. They also can light up. Some of them light up whenever they're disturbed. So if you've ever swam with them, it's kind of like a bluish color. And I've had students that have gone on vacations to the Caribbean and they've swam with them before, and they said it was pretty interesting. Red algae are a multicellular algae, and they have a different type of chlorophyll than plants do, which is why they're red. Brown algae, same thing. They have a unique type of chlorophyll. They form kelp forests, so that's what's in this picture with this scuba diver. And then the euglena you can't really see, but you saw it earlier on the phylogeny. They're just single-celled organisms with a flagellum. And in addition to being photosynthetic, they also consume other protists. Some are mutualistic. For instance, there's one that helps termites. It lives in the gut of termites and helps them digest wood. There's parasitic protists like malaria. The Plasmodium protist it is in your blood, and it destroys red blood cells, and then if a mosquito bites you, the mosquito can spread that protist to another person. Sleeping sickness is spread through the bite of a fly, and then amoebic dysentery is spread through contaminated food or water. All right, so that's it for protists, and I'll see you next week.